So we're Microsoft, and I'm Patrick. I'm one of the security advisors for Windows, and this is Mark.
Hi, I'm Mark Simos. I'm a solutions architect, and I mostly help customers defending against pass the hash and similar attacks.
And I'm with Trustworthy Computing Group. So we're going to talk to you guys about the problem, the way we see it. We're just going to do an overview here of some of the work that we've done on the review. I'm assuming most people are familiar with pass the hash attacks, or at least the concept. Is anyone not familiar with it? I guess we won't get any hands here at BlackHat on that. But we're going to do an overview so we level set. So basically we're going to show you the problem as we see it, and we're going to walk through just a simple attack scenario, and then we're going to go over a review. We published a white paper last year that had some information on pass the hash. Has anybody had a chance to read? How many people read the white paper? So we got a few hands. So we're going to go briefly over. This talk is not about the white paper. We will cover some of the things that were included in the white paper. There are some mitigations in there that are important. Some of the concepts that we put or published on that document is still relevant. So we're going to step through briefly on the review section, and then we're going to jump into platform updates. We're going to go over some new things we've introduced in Windows 8.1 and 2012 R2. And some of this functionality can also be used to mitigate pass the hash. So we're going to walk you through some of the new things that have been introduced. We'll present the concepts, and then we'll take a look at a quick demo to see exactly what we've done under the hood. And at last, we'll cover some next steps and where we're going with this. We formed a work group last year. We released a white paper documenting some initial basic steps that we believe are practical and most organizations could do. We didn't advise anyone to go and re-architect everything or implement anything dramatic. It was really simple mitigations. But the work group will continue. We will continue, as always, trying to improve the platform. So let's go over to the problem. Mark will cover this problem scenario for us.
Okay. And this is a example scenario of how we typically see pass the hash conducted in the field and what we typically observe. And so we're going to kind of just go over that just to do a very quick level set. Ultimately, pass the hash is not an initial compromise. It's not what causes the original box to be popped. So that has to happen, and the attacker has to have control of a domain member to be able to start pass the hash in most circumstances. There's a few exceptions, but they do have to have admin or system level control. So in this case, it's a phishing attack, and one of the users clicks on it, and they have lost control of that box. The attacker is now sharing control of the box. And then typically what the attacker does is they steal a number of different credentials. Some are the LSAS credentials in memory. Some are, the other ones that are available are the local SAM database, the NT hashes, and also any other safe passwords such as the machine account password, services that are starting on that computer. There's a number of different passwords that can be stolen, or credentials rather. And then the attacker then typically takes those credentials and compromises additional machines. And in this case, they found a machine where a domain admin had logged in. And so they've gotten a set of credentials for the domain admin. At that point, they are sharing control of the domain admin account with the legitimate domain admin, because they both have credentials to log into it. And sharing control of a domain admin account means you're sharing control of the domain and all of the resources that are joined to it, including workstations and servers that are member servers, and anything else that's Active Directory integrated that depends on Active Directory for its trust and security. And so that's the typical flow that we see in a lot of these attacks. It's not without exception, but that's typically what we see.
So just to recap, some of the key things here I think that are important to point out is, first of all, when a workstation gets compromised, and let's say the local administrator account password hash gets used on a lateral movement, usually it's because the passwords are the same on those machines, right? So if you have an image that you deploy with the same local administrator account passwords, and that initial machine gets compromised, obviously those password hashes can be used to authenticate and perform lateral movement. Also, if there's privileged accounts on that machine, at that level that the attacker has obtained access, you can do just pretty much anything to obtain those credentials. So whatever's on that box, if it's captured, it can be reused. And I think this is important to keep that in mind as we walk through. So there's some facts that we have to keep in mind though. If we strip the creds out, take the CRADs, we run into a usability problem, right? Every time the user needs to do something, those CRADs are there for a single sign-on and to allow the machine to act on behalf of the user. Every time you go check email, you don't get prompted for a username and password box, and obviously that's why we're storing some of those CRADs in there. And we need credentials to be able for the system to perform on your behalf. The other thing is we have to keep in mind it doesn't matter what we do to the platform, credentials can still be stolen. In a way that if you log in to a compromised computer or you hand those credentials away, whether they're your own or a privileged credential, there's little that we can do with that respect. So it's really a process and technology problem, and that's what we want to highlight. And obviously our focus here to discuss down with platforms updates to see how we can facilitate that and provide you the means to make that more resilient. So let's go over a review of some of the work that we published. For the ones that read the white paper, this would be familiar. For the ones that haven't, we're not going to cover in great detail some of these mitigations, so please take a look at the white paper. We have some references at the end, and we have some reference documentation that we are going to leave with the slides, and then when it's posted, we can go and get that information. So back to the attack scenario that we just covered, the first thing is to protect those privileged accounts. So we've published step by step on guidelines that we believe would be simple enough that anyone could deploy on their infrastructure. And the idea there is that to prevent, or at least to reduce significantly that attack surface for those privileged accounts, right? I mean, a lot of the times the challenge is really knowing where those accounts are and knowing where they're authenticating to. And obviously if there's no control of where they are, and we assume a certain level of compromise, it becomes really problematic, right? Because then it's a matter of time. Also, if we combine that with images having the same password, it becomes really trivial for an attacker to compromise an infrastructure because they increase their attack surface if they haven't already compromised a machine that has those privileged accounts. They can increase significantly their attack surface, and obviously it becomes a problem. So what we wanted our customers to do is to protect those privileged accounts. We got some feedback that maybe this mitigation was too simple, but based on what we've seen through consulting services and through our own experience is that some of these practices are not even commonly deployed. So there's environments become really interconnected, so obviously from an availability standpoint, you end up using privileged accounts to do certain things and machines get compromised. And obviously the attacker is able to elevate its privileges. So we want to protect those accounts. Really that's what it is, and that's what we're trying to cover here. The second thing was to take care of those local accounts. We've seen a number of incidents, like we covered on the attack that accounts share the same username or the same password, and therefore they have the same hash because the hash is not salted. And obviously the hash can be passed and it can be used for authenticated just like plain text passwords. So we want to make sure that those accounts have unique passwords. And we can't do that on the platform managing those local accounts, or we couldn't in the past. But we want to make sure that those accounts are properly handled. So you can deny network logon for authentication for local accounts, and we provided the means to do that. You can randomize those passwords. There's a number of things that you can do. And again, the outcome of that is that even if the attacker compromises that machine, he wouldn't be able to use those password hashes if he obtained them. So the idea here would be on these two mitigations is that containment. I mean, the workstation or the user itself would be compromised, but the risk would be reduced. And again, this is not fixing the problem. What we're trying to do is really reduce that attack surface or the risk.
And the one thing I do want to add real quick is each of these mitigations, 1, 2, and 3, do have prescriptive step-by-step instructions in the white paper for how to implement them, at least at a basic level. Of course, you have to customize for your administrative model, but each of these described is detailed in the white paper.
The last thing we advised was for our customers to use the local firewall administration. I mean, you can use any firewall, you can do segmentation, but the point here is really to restrict traffic or untrusted or undesirable traffic that could be at risk to workstations. Local firewall management on a server infrastructure, we realize that's not doable, but workstations, they can benefit from that, and that would also reduce the attack surface. If an attacker can't connect to a machine, then he won't be able to authenticate to it.
So there's a couple of mitigations that have been proposed and discussed in a number of different forums, some public, some private. And we wanted to highlight where these don't by themselves stop credential theft or pass the hash. The first one is disabling NTLM. Disabling NTLM is a great security move forward in your security posture, but pass the ticket, stealing a password, stealing it through from LSAS memory or from keystrokes, any of those elements are still available even if NTLM is completely disabled. So we don't really consider the credential theft problem solved just by disabling NTLM, although it is a good thing to do, and we have some progress to report on that later. Smart cards and multi-factor authentication. Fundamentally, the workstation where the conversion from two-factor is made into one-factor, so NTLM, Kerberos, all these are one-factor protocols. So if you have the TGT, if you have the NT hash that's associated with the account, you can still authenticate as that account even with a smart card logon. So smart cards themselves are wonderful, great technologies. We love them. The multi-factor aspect is great. However, they do not alone solve pass the hash without a secure host that is not compromised. Jump servers also suffer from a similar thing. Does everybody know what jump servers are? You RDP into a server and then you do administration. So a jump server, you still have to type your password in. You still have to type in various other credentials. You have to prove who you are. And that machine has access to those original proof. Now, some of them, like RSA tokens, can turn out and such, but fundamentally you are exposing to that lower trust machine that's jumping up to the higher RDP server the credentials that allow you to authenticate. So they are not a magical solution by themselves. And then, of course, rebooting workstations and servers after you use them, it doesn't hurt, but the credentials are still exposed at the point of entry and during the session. So they don't magically solve the problem by themselves.
All right, so let's talk about new stuff. So this has been what we done last year. The white paper is available. Like I said, there'll be references. We will later update some of that information with some of the new mitigations that we can enable now. So what we're going to cover now is the stuff in 8.1 or blue and 2012 R2, which is in preview, and it's available in preview. So we've made some core platform changes. If you guys if anyone has been playing with Mimikatz or WCE on the new preview, you've seen that we've cleaned up a few things. We removed LM hashes from LSAS, so no longer those hashes are available. We know they're weak, and we started the process by looking holistically what we could do, what we could get rid of, and still, like I said, back to the reducing the attack surface. Those are things that we were able to do, so we got rid of it. The other thing that we did is, has anybody here playing with Mimikatz? I assume most people do, right? Yeah, good. So we don't have to get down that road. So if you played with Mimikatz, you run the tool, it's single binary, do a dump, you see all those credentials in plain text, right? They're not in plain text, they're reversibly encrypted, but the encryption keys in the process memory, and we got to put them somewhere. And at that level of access, I mean, even if we were to update that, the attackers would still be able to obtain that and decrypt. So we'll call them plain text equivalent for now, but bottom line is the attackers are able to dump them in plain text. We'll look over this in a little bit more detail in a little bit. The other thing we did was when we were doing some testing, we noticed, there's times that obviously there's session leaks or there are things that cause some machines that even after you log off, you still have some credentials in memory. So we strictly enforce log off. So what we do now is once you log off that machine, we make sure that there is no process that are running on that user that's logged in. One more change that we did, and again, you can see how especially this one will relate to our mitigation too. We want to push preventing local accounts, and more specifically local admin accounts, from being used to access machines on the network. And what we've done is we've marked the SID of the local accounts and the local accounts that are members of the domain administrators group. Those are the new SIDs.
Of the local administrators group.
Yeah.
And just one last note on those last list of features. All of those are on by default. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to configure anything. Those are just default behavior changes in the platform.
There's a few other changes that we're going to cover down here that they're not really mitigations, but they're changes that we made in directions that we're going. We're also going to cover that just for transparency. We also modified remote desktop. We know a lot of administrators like to use remote desktop, and a remote desktop, as it stands right now, you use it. We're going to cover in a little bit more detail, but basically passes your credential to the target host that you're going to, and then it authenticates on your behalf. Therefore, that machine, authenticate to access those resources on your behalf. Therefore, that machine will have your credentials and it can be captured. So what we did is we've implemented basically a flag that goes to RDP on a new mode that is called restricted admin mode. So when you use the remote desktop client with this flag, what will happen, and again, we're going to get in a little bit more details on this, but basically those credentials are not passed to the target workstation. So if you need to log into a machine to do administrative work, you'll be able to do that without disclosing your credentials.
And that includes any type of target, whether it's an RDP to a server or to a workstation. So anything that you RDP to, you can do it, authenticate to it, but not provide credentials on that far end. And it is configurable both as a command line switch to the mstsc.exe, as well as you can enforce a GPO on the place where you're running the RDP client, where that is run, and it will obey that GPO.
So obviously, this will facilitate the administration of machines. The credentials, if they're not there, they can't be captured, but obviously there are limitations. If you start that connection from a compromised box or a computer, we're not protecting you against that. Obviously, it goes without saying. There are limitations. So if we look at a little bit in comparison how RDP used to work, so you enter your credentials, right? This laser is so weak. You enter your credentials, it's passed to the Windows host, and you connect to resources as the user. Now, what we're doing is, whether in curb mode or in NTLM, you connect to a Windows 8.1 device, and the RDP will connect without sending those credentials only. And in curb, we'll be using a service ticket, and on network logon, those creds are also stripped once it's authenticated. The only thing is, when you're on that machine, in restrict admin mode, your creds are not there. So if you're trying to access resources that are associated with you, you're not going to be able to reach them. Because you're going to be basically the computer account. You do need to have the remote admin flag in order for this to work. We're going to cover protected accounts in a little bit. If you use protected accounts without restrict admin mode, or any other accounts without, your credentials will be sent to the target host.
And a couple of quick little extra technical details. You get a service ticket to that RDP host where that's running the session, or a normal NTLM challenge response, which does not transfer the credentials over. That authenticates you, proves who you are. And then they did something new and different, is instead of creating the process level token from scratch on the RDP host, they actually create a local token based on that network token, so that's how they populate that data structure. So to that RDP host, you are you. You're the person that authenticated, logged in. It's got a token like it always would. And when you travel off that box, you are traveling as the machine account. And so it will look like that computer is taking actions in all the various logs. So just to give you guys a little technical depth on how that works.
Are you planning on changing that?
The question is, are we planning on changing that? We just implemented this functionality, right? I can't comment if we're going to change to a new model. You mean on a new version or something like that?
I was referring specifically to the logging. You're having users take actions in the machine account. That makes it really hard to audit.
Correct. And that's actually a good question. We understand that. The thing is, if that machine is compromised already, right? I mean, you can use the computer account if it's locked. Now, the way RDP in restricted admin mode is set up to is strictly for that administration of that machine without the resources on behalf of the user. So a short answer is there is no plans on changing that at the moment.
So only use the restricted admin when you're trying to deal with remediating the box, not as a standard operating procedure.
Anytime you need to administer only that box and support, whether it's the workstation or the server, and you don't trust it fully and you don't want to expose your credentials to it, it is extremely well suited for that scenario. It is not necessary. It is not the default. It is something you have to explicitly set a GPO on your help desk workstations, or you have to explicitly do /restricted admin.
Kevin, sorry for interrupting.
That's okay. We're actually going to save some of the questions at the end. We'll leave some time in our booth to go over some of the questions. We expect quite a few questions. So
protected users. So this is very much a supporting feature to a couple of others. One, effectively what protected users does, it's a new group in Active Directory. When you put a user in this group, they are restricted to only using Kerberos to authenticate and only a restricted pre-configured form of Kerberos. So only AES for the various cryptographic operations in the protocol, only a 4-hour lifetime that is non-renewable. This can be overridden with authentication policies, which we'll cover next. And delegation is forbidden on this account. So it is fundamentally a Kerberos-only account, and it's even enforced on the domain level. So if you have valid NT hashes to do authentication, the domain will not authenticate those hashes for a protected user. And this, like all of the other features we've been discussing, is currently only available on the 8.1 and Server 2012 R2 preview. So the big thing where protected users is a very key effect is in the authentication policies, because those policies, which we'll discuss as the last technical item, are enforcing Kerberos policies, and you have to make sure that the user can only use Kerberos for those policies to fully take effect. It does not prevent someone from interactively signing onto a host, exposing their credentials there, and it's Kerberos only. It does not fall back on NTLM. So if your Kerberos is broken, or one of the dependencies that allows Kerberos to work, the SPNs, DNS lookups, etc., you will not be able to log in with these accounts. So you have to be careful. This forces the account into Kerberos only. And the picture here just talks about how the DC does refuse NTLM authentication in the case of a protected user, and those are some of the specifics on the features. You guys want to see some demos?
all right, let's take a look at this. Hopefully the demo gods are with us. So what I have here is a Win 8.1 client, blue, attached to a 2012 R2 domain, as well as a Win 8 client. So that would represent anything prior to 8.1. And the first thing we're going to do is get my desktop to work. So here's my Win 8 client, and what we're going to do is, to save some time, we're going to just run Mimikatz. Most of you are the ones that have run. This is nothing new. Just run. It's one binary, a couple flags, and you get Mimikatz to work and to do its thing. And I'm just going to fight with my desktop here. There we go. All right, so I ran Mimikatz on my Win 8 client.
So this is currently what happens on all current shipping platforms.
And on this case, just to save some time, I had a session with my local admin in here, and I had a domain user, which is represented in here. And as you see, here's your user account, here's your domain. I mean, domain, the user is just user, domain is domain, and the local admin is local_admin. And here's your password for TS package, here's your password for wdigest, and here's your password for Kerberos authentication. Also, if we look at, so we got your local admin, or this is another session. I started this just to save a little bit of time. Here's the same thing, password, hashes. We got our ALM hash, your NT hash, and again, the same series of passwords. Now I'm going to switch over to blue and do the exact same thing. So we let Mimikatz do its thing. Oh my God, not really. Oh my, there you go. And as we start looking at it, here's the interactive user domain. So we still have LM hashes are gone, they're zeroed. TS package is disabled by default. Now, a good thing to point out, and again, at the end, we'll just go over a quick summary here of what we're just showing you guys, but just to show you that really the passwords are no longer there. We got rid of the LM hashes, and now that is also valid for the local account. Where is it?
And the empty hashes are still there for all accounts by default.
Here we go. Here's the local admin at the bottom. Now, I have a user here, which is my protected user, and say the protected user has authenticated to this box.
And just to explain that, local_admin is a local account, which is why you're seeing the plain text password in memory.
So, my pAdmin user, as you see, it's set up and joined to the protected users group, and I have previous login here again just to save us time, and as you see, this is what you get. No creds. And obviously no creds, they can't be stolen. So I think the protected admin group, just gonna...
And the protected admin kicks off two protections when you put a user in there. On the DC level, it refuses the authentication from the down level protocols, and then on each individual client that they log into, the up level clients that behave this way, it does not cache any of the credentials. It will be there for the first use because it has to authenticate the user, it's exposed to that machine, but it does not keep or cache any of them for the user session.
And here you can see the curb ticket for the user that's logged in.
It does have a TGT, but no other cache credentials.
All right, so now what we're going to look at, I mean, I'm going to be using my DC here, but obviously this is not a good idea for administration. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to log in to my Windows Blue as the pAdmin with restricted admin mode.
And you notice that he didn't get prompted for credentials.
Actually, before I do that, I'm just going to cancel that.
In the restricted
Quickly.
admin mode, it uses the
There's too
authentication
many accounts there.
of the session that you're in to log you in to that remote target.
So I could have logged out of, sign out of each one of them, but this will be quicker. I can show you. While my RDP connection does its thing. What we're doing here is just RDPing using the restricted flag as well as a protected user account. So in that case, user can't log with NTLM. Oh, demo God's not with us, as that machine's still rebooting. No. Maybe not.
And again, connecting from the DC as essentially the support workstation because we ran out of VM space, and then connecting into that same client we were connecting to earlier in restricted admin mode. So the only credentials we should see are the credentials of the machine account itself.
Yeah, I'm going to cancel this demo. I'll just walk you guys through what we've done in terms of summary, because otherwise we're going to... So anyways, what we saw there when I dumped the creds is basically this. This is what we had before. Microsoft account is the MSA. You didn't see that. And by the way, this table, we had a different table here. This table was tweeted, or a similar table, tweeted by the Mimikatz author, and we liked it. And we just modified a little bit to include some of the changes that we've done that weren't documented, and we'll just walk over. So that's what you used to see before when I showed you all those creds. Microsoft account, you didn't see it because we're not connected to the network. This is an isolated test environment, and that's what you see on 8.1. The asterisk there is just to highlight that it's off by default, but if you do enable TS package or wdigest, those creds will be there and they can be stolen and reused. And this is what you see with protected user and restricted admin mode. So that really sums it up in terms of what you can use. And like I said, the creds won't be there for local administration. So Mark is just going to walk you guys over some of the policies that we changed.
Yep. And I just want to explain one last thing. On that table, the third-party SSP, if someone puts a SSP on that box, it will have access to those credentials. Whether it caches it or not is up to that provider, but the current architecture of the SSP provides the credentials to those SSPs. So, authentication policies and silos. Is the mic on? Can you guys hear me? Okay. So authentication policies and silos are two new types of objects in Active Directory. They are forest-wide policies and policy silos that enforce authentication rules on Kerberos logons. Two types of rules that you can do. Where a TGT may be issued, so based on the identity of the machine that you are requesting your TGT from, so the user, the service account, whatever is authenticating on that machine, will the DC provide a TGT to that workstation? And then the other question is, if I have a TGT and I'm logged in, can I get a service ticket to this service? And so you can restrict it at the service level and at the issuance of the TGT level. Authentication policy silos are very much a support function of authentication policies. Authentication policies do the enforcement. Silos make them a little easier to manage. I'll show you how that works. And the effect is you get granular control of authentication within an Active Directory forest environment. Key is this is not just a switch you turn on. This is something that has to be planned, has to be designed, has to work for the administration model of the enterprise. And of course, enforcement requires Kerberos, which means that you need to have the users that are going to be the user accounts that are going to be managed by the authentication policies have to be protected users for them to take effect, so that NTLM fallback is not an option. So when you enforce authentication policies, there are three fundamental different types of principles in the Active Directory. One is a standard user account, which we're all familiar with. Sometimes you can use a user account to run a service, and it acts as a service, so it can be managed in both of those ways. A computer account is a separate account type, and it has a different set of rules, and the policies allow you to configure those differently than you would configure the policies for a computer or from a user. And then the third is a service account, and that's comprised of two different object types, a managed service account or a group managed service account. And that's what those policies refer to in the authentication policies. So I'm going to give you guys a quick view of what this looks like and where to manage it, and then I'm going to switch back to slides because quite frankly it's a very busy interface and I want to focus on the elements that are interesting. Okay, there's my DC. So these guys are pretty easy to get to within the authentication policy and silos. Within the Active Directory Administrative Center. You notice, wait, I'm looking at it on my screen, not on yours. I apologize. There we go. So this is the Active Directory Administrative Center. Bottom left there under Dynamic Access Control, there's those two new nodes. One is authentication policy silos, and one is authentication policies. The policy silos are effectively, for the purposes of authentication policy, they are like groups. So if we crack open one of these guys, you'll notice that there's a number of principles that you can put into it. And you can put users, computers, service accounts. And then of course, you can apply the policy to them. So it's very much like a group. Ultimately the control though is on, and this is some mouse acrobatics I didn't anticipate. The control is on the accounts. So if you look at the server admin account, for example, go down to the policy area, you'll notice you can assign a authentication policy or a policy silo. Silos take precedence over policy. So if a silo has a policy associated with it, users configure to both, the silo will win. And ultimately that silo itself, which we just saw is associated with the policy, here. So let me switch back to slides real quick and kind of highlight the key points to make sure I don't forget anything. So going over the interface, And the silo, of course, does take precedence. And the authentication silo example that I was showing you has pretty much, it links all of those principles together into that and assigns the policy to it. And then when you look at the policy itself, there's a couple sections. The first part, you can link those accounts directly to a policy and say this account is done with the policy. But if you ever want to change what policy a user is associated with, you then have to go and update the authentication policy each time. So we prefer the silos because it's a little easier to manage. Moving down next to the user section. You can set up rules. I've set them up in a very simple way, which is if they're in the silo, the user can get a TGT from any of those places. You can also set up rules and specifically say, okay, this group of computers, this user may only get a TGT from this group of computers in Active Directory. It's pretty much group or silo is the two choices you have there. If that user account is running a service, so this is a service account, but it's not an Active Directory service account type. It's an actual user account running a service. You can restrict who may get a service ticket to talk to that service. Not very common on the user side. However, on the service side, that green box on the bottom becomes a lot more interesting because you can restrict, I don't want this sensitive finance app that's running by the finance services, the service account, I don't want anyone authenticating to it from outside of the silo, period. They can't even get a service ticket for it. And of course, if I can want to restrict where that service can then reach out as an authenticated principal, I can also restrict it to the silo so it cannot get a TGT and run anything outside of the silo. And the last piece is a computer. All of these things that I've discussed previously rely on the Kerberos armoring feature, which was introduced in Windows 8 and 2012 R2. And effectively, the Kerberos armoring feature lets us know where that authentication is happening from because we authenticate who the computer is and then we build on that and get a TGT for either the service or the user account. Because the computer is the initial part of that, the computer doesn't have another identity where it authenticates to. So the only control you have is the place where the TGT, who can get a service ticket to it. Because many services, which are the target of authentication, are running under the computer system account, local service, local system, in which case you can restrict who can authenticate to that machine.
So this is more of a clarification as opposed to mitigation. We have enabled LSA protection as a protected process. We have some documentation on it. Yes, it does block some of the current tools from reading because it requires signing and protected process only talks to protected process. But we do know that this, at its current state, it can be bypassed. The tools can use other means to dump that process memory and still achieve. So we're not really pushing this as a mitigation, but because we're documenting, we wanted to just clarify. So that's just that you can enable protected process as a direction that we're going, and there will probably be more on that later. Now, some of this information like Win 8 and Win 8.1 has been available as of last week. The Windows Server 2012 stuff documentation was published today, so it should be available by now. These links will be available on the slides, and we're going to leave our contact information if you guys want more information on this. So where are we with Pass the Hash, or credential theft and reuse in general? So we formed a work group. We released this white paper that we're advising you guys to read and that we will update. We've been working, trying to get some internally proposed product updates. We've implemented some of these updates in Win 8.1, and it's available for you to play around. We're recommending, especially people from the security community, go out, get the preview, play around with it, see what you think, give us some feedback. And we're going to also backport some of these updates. I can't give you guys the details because we're still looking into this and looking at dependencies and other details of what exactly we can backport, but there will be an advisor that will be released with some information. Here's our contact information. Again, I'm Patrick, this is Mark. We will continue to investigate this issue. And as a last note to you guys before we wrap up, we just want to say we're looking for people that want to improve the security of our products. So if you're interested, come to our booth. Mark and I will reserve the next half hour. We'll be at the booth answering questions, so please come and join us. Thank you.